Hi, welcome back, everyone. It's 1st of January, and this is so happy New Year. And the only way to have reach real happiness, not relative happiness because this or that, but the only to reach real peace, happiness is, in our experience, to be deeply devoted, engaged in consciousness awakening work. And this is episode 39. And you'll see below the playlist to the whole playlist for the last year. Peter Ingle and myself, we have been talking, exploring ideas under the title Reigniting the Fragments of the Fourth Way. And today, we don't have a precise topic. We feel like we have covered quite thoroughly a lot of the main ideas and practices in the fourth way. And today, we just have some, let's say, loose ends. So we are going to talk today about there's different types of work. Somebody who's on the beginning of the work, like a man or woman number 1 to 3, the work is different than somebody who is already seriously anchored, devoted to the work. And then that self-remembering in the work will be different for somebody who is, let's say, partially awake. Also, we are going to touch on this idea of bearing your cross, as Jesus would say, but has to do with how to better use the friction, the pressure that arises as we are facing ourselves and we are trying to bring awareness to our life. This comes with certain reactive energies and strong unpleasant energies, and somehow how to, instead of trying to throw the cross away from the shoulder, how to shoulder it in a way that we infuse our work with more possibilities. So we'll talk about also dynamics of a group and how it can be useful and how it can be a trap, and also how to strengthen one's work and develop one's practice. So yeah, stay tuned and enjoy. As Gojo would say, waking up and to become more conscious, waking up and then dying, and then being born. So no matter how you put it, there is some kind of crisis, agony, or medium or mild roasting, seared, and people, I think on the path initially or in the middle, we don't like it and we don't assume it. We don't say, hey, this is part of the thing, this is part of the process. So there's a residual attitude of to feel better, to feel better, and oh, again this thing, and I still have this thing. And so what I understood, this intentional suffering, is with the waking up and with the with seeing all of this and de-identifying and this sense of me weakening. There is some dying pain with that, and that's what you called before. There's a cross. Somehow we need to sign up to carry the cross until it gets lighter and lighter. I get it, but
well, we have to carry it anyway, is how I understand it. We are our cross. Our life is the cross we are bearing, whether we like it or not. But what this idea of voluntary suffering, intentional suffering, means suddenly, instead of it just happening to us and us not liking it and us wanting to get rid of it and resolve it and make it all better, we realize, oh, okay, so I'll now do this. The expression, of course, was that word voluntary. It's interesting that word was chosen by Uspensky and Gurdjieff. It was intentional. You make it intentional.
mm-hmm.
This is an important psychological shift now. in our inner world, where instead of us reacting to our life, we're now responding with intention, and preferably with conscious, not just conscious intention, meaning, purposeful intention, but with conscious awareness, where we are now bearing this cross, to use that analogy, and we're doing it in such a way that this pressure of this cross can fuel awareness itself, can fuel consciousness itself. And when you think about pressure, what is pressure? Pressure is when two forces come together, at least, or let's say forces come together, and it produces energy. And oftentimes what happens to us is this energy is produced and it's negatively charged. So now pressure in our life is created. It's negatively charged. We react, usually with resistance or with wishing it to go away, wishing it to get better. Help me find a way to make it better. I'll take pills, I'll adopt practices, I'll follow leader. You tell me what to do to make it better and I'll do it. Give myself to God, whatever it is. Seeking relief rather than understanding how to use pressure consciously. So what happens is now this pressure that's negatively charged, because by nature it's like that, but then we we meet it with resistance, and that heightens the negative charge. To suffer voluntarily, to conscious effort, conscious labor, as you put it at one point, voluntary suffering, intentional suffering, now means instead of us reacting with resistance, we're going to neutralize that negative charge by accepting it. Now, by opening ourselves up to our life as it is, and to our psychology as it is, and to all of our experiences as they are and have been, opening ourselves up, we are changing the charge. We're turning it from a negative, we're almost transferring from the negative charge in the battery, the negative terminal, now trying to neutralize it, and so the energy goes up to the positive terminal. This is very much related to the idea of transforming negative emotions, transforming suffering. The idea in the fourth way of having positive emotions. It doesn't mean now I'm going to create positive emotions. No, it means if we reverse this charge, it will yield positive emotions. And that means emotions of a much higher nature, not joy and happiness and cheerfulness and good-naturedness and positive, all that's, no, profound, deeper, subtler emotions about our existence as a human being on earth. And what that means. And human life is meant to be pressure-filled. Life on earth is a pressure cooker. There's meant to be pressure, but the question is, will the pressure just produce negative energy that defeats us, let's say, and keeps us enmeshed in our sense of identity, our sense of self? Or can that pressure yield a kind of energy that we can transform? Or how can we transform that energy is another way to put it. And that's what this work is in many ways. It's the transference, the transformation, the transmutation of this energy that's created by pressure. And we do this, voluntary suffering even means in the fourth way, not expressing negative emotions. And what a lot of people don't understand is, guess what? That creates pressure. You're now voluntarily creating pressure in yourself by withholding the expression of a negative emotion. Someone does something and you want to snap at them or say something or gossip about them, whatever it is, you withhold. And now there's pressure internally. And if you understand that you're creating that purposely, consciously, intentionally for yourself, of course, you then have to understand what's the next step. And this is what gets overlooked is, well, wait a minute, what's the next step? Yes, there's a next step. And there's more than one next step in that process to come to full transformation, transcendence, transmutation.
Yeah. Somebody said recently, I forgot who, but it stayed with me, connected to our discussion here. we as the I, real I, we are transcendental beings, and it is our responsibility to transcend every arising phenomena. We are transcendental beings, and it's our responsibility to transcend any arising phenomena, but without bypassing or trying not to feel the transcending has some element of, or what you described before, the negative emotion, let's say, the not expressing it, because that reaction which you have expressed, that's a whole kind of me, separate me, kind of ignorance that is going to spit itself out into the world. So we are kind of holding that spit in order to
Yes.
investigate it, and then it breaks down more, and then it turns more this like, and then transcending that, feeling that, but consciously rising above it, but not bypassing it.
Yes, it's a kind of psychological warfare.
Yeah.
And but it has to be spiritual warfare. Can't just be us fighting with ourselves, wrestling with ourselves, beating up on ourselves, or trying to win on the same level as the war is happening. We're trying to, victory means rising above. It doesn't mean bypassing, doesn't mean buffering, deflecting, avoiding, denying. No, it means rising above. And of course, the only thing that can rise above is consciousness. And it is consciousness that is the, what did you call celestial? We are something
We are
being?
transcendental beings.
Yes. The consciousness in us is of a transcendental nature. We ourselves are not transcendental beings. This is often misunderstood. No, this body, this mind is not a transcendental being. The consciousness in us has the potential to be transcendent. And that to me is the idea of man is made in the image of God. This is the inner meaning of life on earth as a human being on planet Earth. This potential is planted in us, in this vessel, and it can transcend. And theoretically, its origin, its source, it is transcendental already. Yes, many of the teachings say that. But its potential is unrecognized by itself. And that's the whole idea, is that's what self-realization means. That's, as I understand it, this consciousness, this awareness, recognizing its potential of transcendence. Guess what? There's something in us that does not need to identify with all of these eyes in us, all these thoughts, emotions, sensations. In fact, our entire life. In fact, our whole idea of ourselves as a person and our entire life, there's something in us that does not need to identify and can, to use the fourth way language, escape. And it means escaping identification with all of that. In the meantime, it is our cross. We are bearing, in many ways, we are enduring our life. I had a lot of things just go on inside of me when I said that, because I know some people seem to enjoy their lives. I'm not sure it's actually the case. We don't really see what's going on beneath the surface in many people, but
I
in most.
feel like that this enduring our life, or the cross, bearing the cross, it's more like enduring. The more we are more aware, the sense of separation, the setting of separation is revealed more and more to us. So enduring that sense of separation in the mind, in the body, in the enduring it and keep moving forward through it, moving through it. Like, judgments, like self-hatred, comparisons, worrying about my image. Yeah, that is painful in itself, and it's not going to go right away. As soon as we start doing some self-remembering, or as soon as we observe something, it's not going to go right away. It's going to be maybe a few years, or a few months, or a few years, until those things that will kind of get me by the throat, they are now just a small cramp that passes.
Because it's never painful to consciousness. It's never painful to awareness. This is a different dimension in us. It's not touched. Can it choose to identify? Yes, it can choose to leave its higher dimension and enter the lower dimension of our psychology and our physiology, and then that will make things worse. But it has to be questioned. Who is pained? Who is feeling this discomfort? You see, this feeling of I that has become entrenched in us. We're embedded. Our consciousness is embedded in a sense of I, a feeling of I. And that is what gets troubled and pained. And the power of transformation is when the realization happens that there is this discomfort, whatever form it may take, and then there's this feeling of I am feeling this discomfort. And then there's the realization something else is seeing both of those. Most of the time we're in the middle. We're stuck. I feel terrible. I need to resolve this. And then there's all the things that are making me uncomfortable. Yes. Most of the time that's where people are. And very seldomly does the pure consciousness itself realize itself as the witnessing, the seeing, without a sense of I, just seeing. Then something begins to, then this transference I was talking about from the negative terminal of the battery, now the energy starts to flow toward the positive terminal. And that can take time. That period of transference, of transmutation, can take time for the full energy to move from the negative terminal to the positive terminal in such a way that we can learn. It's like so that when it happens again in the future, after that, you know in yourself intuitively how to switch to the positive terminal. You don't have to struggle because there's enough accumulated. There's enough being in you accumulated that, and it's enough. The accumulation is in consciousness itself. This is consciousness realize itself, recognizing itself, becoming more solidified as itself, above the feeling of being Peter, above the feeling of being Mihai with all his issues and problems and whatnot.
It's just a moment here with a lot of associations. Want to follow some of your threads. I guess what we call the feeling of I, might be confusing for people, but this is what, feeling of I, this is more like the small me, the small imaginary picture of myself that's small, meaning that it feels separate, it's based on the body. So this me, the me, as opposed to the I. I is consciousness, me is this imagined sense of separate me, which is actually made of actually the consciousness that is dormant somehow, in a dormant state, and producing some illusory perceiving wrongly reality. Even this feeling of me is made of consciousness plus identification with some idea, with the mind, with the body, right?
Well, and so is the whole background feeling of I also. This is what I'm proposing. This more beyond that, even this deep feeling of I, which you could correlate with essence, what the fourth way calls essence. This too is not pure consciousness. This is the rudiments of it. But even this deep feeling of I am now working on myself. I am trying to transcend. It's still this feeling. There's something that sees that. This is the subtle shift. Something is seeing that. And that is what transcends. The deep feeling of I does not transcend, because even that deep feeling of I, as soon as your so-called problems go away for a few minutes, or that feeling of I, it settles down and it feels, good. Things are okay now. I feel much better. That's still this feeling of I can remember myself now. I can be more present now. No, that's still I. It's not about I. It's not about I. And I is very deep in us, and something to do with us being here on earth. Our consciousness is pulled down into this psychological framework and into the physiological mechanism of the body. And anyways, it's a strong attachment. And yes, we were going to talk too at one point, Mihai, about the fourth way is so interesting in that because it distinguishes these different levels. Some of the things we've been talking about refer to the work of what the fourth way would call a man number 5, or even a man number 6. And some of it refers to what the fourth way calls a man number 4. And some of it refers even to what the fourth way calls men number 1, 2, and 3. So what are these distinctions? And what are we really talking about here? And you can't get ahead of yourself. You really can't get ahead of yourself in this respect. And you can't make a jump. You can't overstep a
leg of the journey.
A leg of thank you, yes, or a hurdle. They're different hurdles, and they continue to be hurdles to leap over. Consciousness has to become increasingly nimble and subtle and conscious as this pure. Yes, because even again, there's something that can see the feeling of I being experienced. And the mind cannot comprehend that. The mind cannot figure out what that is. It's confusing, baffling almost to the mind. Cannot. Wants a definition, wants a formula, wants a framework, wants a handhold, all that. But no, that has to intuit itself consciously. You can be, right now, you can see whatever's in front of you with your consciousness without it being thoughts or feelings or sensations, or even the sense, I am looking at this. There can be something more subtle, deeper, just the consciousness. And we fall prey to thinking then it becomes, ooh, look what I'm now conscious of. And that's not it. The irony is the more consciousness becomes conscious as itself, the more consciously it sees everything else. And the more tempting it is to then identify with all these things, other things being seen, instead of realizing what's happening is the realization of consciousness itself is deepening and expanding. And that's what it's about.
And that is a much more impersonal. It's an impersonal. The me,
Yes.
personal, limited, localized, tormented, and I mean, I as the presence is impersonal. But this doesn't mean that it's dry or it's flat. That's the thing. It's impersonal as not being a person. It's more like
And it's also not a thought.
yeah.
And it's not an emotion. And it's not a sensation. And so, yeah, and therefore there is no foundation for it to be personal. To form into all of those things contribute to this formation of this feeling of I. And the feeling of I gets lodged in our centers, in our instinct, in our emotions, in our thoughts. You know, there's a saying, someone, I don't remember now, maybe Nisargadatta, not until you completely disappear do you, meaning all of what we're talking about, all of this feeling of I, no, not until that completely disappears do you fully exist. Because what that means is consciousness is always distracted to some degree by this feeling of I, these I's, these thoughts, these emotions, these sensations, plans, fears, worries, regrets. It's always being distracted a little bit. And I intuit at the moment of death, as consciousness manages to remain conscious as itself, and the body shuts down and the centers turn off, and the whole feeling of I as a person vanishes, that it will encounter an even deeper realization of being. Will no longer have any of that as for reference at all. And to me, that, quite honestly, I don't think it's sacrilege in the fourth way to say that could represent even a third conscious shock. That moment could become the ultimate third conscious shock, where awareness rises even higher, transcends even more. But now we're getting way
Yeah,
ahead.
you know, Peter, in the Indian, Hindu, Sanskrit, they talk about samadhi, deep presence, pure awareness, and they call about mahasamadhi. They say when a master died, yeah, the body died. They say he attained his mahasamadhi, which is like the great samadhi. So the celebration, like their death, is like the great samadhi. So it coincides somehow with what you're saying here with the third conscious shock. But I would like to go back to something that we talked before, and you alluded to it now, that the practical, experiential, active work, conscious effort is different depending on where we are on this journey. And in the fourth way, they have these degrees, levels of being, from being asleep, man number 1, 2, or 3, all the way to man number 7. And only that, man number 7, it's what Gurdjieff called that now, that's a real man. Is the process has been complete. It's not just an acorn, it's a oak tree. And that is a man in the image of God. That's a man. The other one, that's not the real man. It's yeah. So we were talking about that the work will look different, and it's good to know where we are at and what is practical for us and what's the next step, what's the current next step for us. And also you alluded to, you said this is a spiritual warfare. It's not a psychological warfare.
Well, it's both.
Yeah.
Spirit, and when the more spiritual it becomes, the less it becomes warfare. And it's how I see it. Consciousness is not fighting a war with the eyes. the eyes do fight a war with themselves. And even on the level of what the fourth way calls the deputy steward and steward, there's still an internal struggle, you could say, for dominance or predominance, for control. The lower wants to maintain itself. The higher is trying to gain some kind of, like trying to get a hold of the reins and steer the horse so the wagon will go more smoothly, something like this. But then when consciousness itself, the more it is there as a participant, a full participant, it's not a war. It's more like it's more subtle. And yeah, it's psycho. No, I keep thinking of these different examples, but no, you see, why? Because our psychology and our physiology, our instinctive center, as well as our other centers, want to draw, they're designed almost, you could say, to draw consciousness into themselves. And the way they do that is with conflict. Again, this negative polarization, this negative charge. Come fuel this negative terminal on the battery, please, to keep me going. And consciousness begins to realize, no. And by virtue of not doing that, the energy begins to change.
Yeah, it's more like a surfing rather than warfare. Not getting sucked into the waves, surfing them.
Yes, literally not identifying, not being pulled into a sense of identity in relation to these eyes. When all these different eyes and sensations and memories and whatnot surface in us, begin to percolate again. And remember, they don't do it all the time, which is also interesting. But when they do, can something, a part of us, not join in? Can a part of us just see that instead of becoming that? And instead of becoming, I am now struggling with myself in a certain area, can a part of us watch the fray from a distance? Not as a bypassing, as we've mentioned many times, because it's important to keep saying that, but as a pure, not even the pure witness, the pure seeing. Because even this feeling of being the witness, to me, is you're still in the psychological realm. And that's a good thing when you can feel that you are just the witness. But you're now like a fish swimming in the lake with all the other fish, and you just can be more conscious of yourself as this fish observing fish. And you're swimming around and you're looking at all the other fish, and you're trying not to be so identified with them. But that's different than being out of the lake, standing on the side of the lake, looking down into the water and watching all the fish and realizing those are fish. I'm out here. And those aren't me. Those are just fish in the lake. But most of the time we're in there. We jump in and we are the fish. They are us. And that's what it feels like.
Yeah, yeah, I like this metaphor because on some stage of growth, we're developing a work personality, the interest in the work, the seeming me wanting to wake up, which is, we can't skip over that, and making effort and studying and using the tools. It becomes, as you said, it's a fish. It's a fish. Or in some some old Christian texts, they talk about there's like a tree, and that there's a bird in the lower branches living life and being miserable or happy or chasing this or that, and there's another bird on the top of the tree that's just watching the other bird. But let's go back to the aquarium or the lake fish that is more above and looking all the other fish. But you know, I find it that actually it's the transition is that it's not that I am outside of the lake, it's that I am the water. The water is aware of the fish. I was the water all along. You know, it's because it's, yeah, I like this more than being outside, something outside. Of course, metaphors break down, they are limited, but that's the not being a special fish or a special enlightened fish. It's more like realizing that the water is conscious and I is that, this field, open, receptive, welcoming, impersonal. But I want to get more practical also because I mean practical for some of the people that are coming to the groups I'm doing that been going on maybe for a year or so. So it's relatively recent. And we studied there, okay, we studied some basic foundational working with attention, observing oneself, working not to be lost in daydreaming and observing inner considering and trying to not be sucked in it. And features, we learn about these core features, and people in the group are, anyway, they are much more informed and they are much more aware in a way that they start to verify these things that teaching is talking about. They verify, oh my God, there's this pattern keeps arising and I get identified with it. And there's this trying to be special and trying to be liked and trying to be seductive or trying to be right or this. Anyway, this is what all the features we talked in previous talk. So the danger I see, I mean, danger, but it's natural for this phase. But the danger is that, okay, now I'm working on the feature. I am trying to catch this. I'm trying not to go there. I'm trying to resist this. So there is some kind of, but at the same time, there is no self-remembering. There's no, it's more like, that's what it alluded to me, it now becomes a psychological warfare. I'm me trying to work with a feature or with inner considering, and we miss the, yeah, can you speak about this if you have any thoughts on this and how to correct that while having the pattern in my face and playing it and I can't stop it, and you know
The first thought that comes is that what the fourth way calls self-observation and self-remembering actually happens at each degree at each level of being. What is called a man number 5 and a man number 6, and presumably a man number 7 and even higher. There's also some degree of self-observation coupled with self-remembering. They're actually aspects of the same thing. They're both coming from consciousness. On the one, consciousness is looking out from its source, you could say. And that's what self-observation is. It's the self of consciousness observing, but it's also, you could say, well, I'm observing myself. This person is being observed, and that's self-observation. And that's true on that level. And the same with your psychology. It's the psychology that's being observed. And yet what's doing the observing is something else. The self-remembering is that other thing, let's call it, that's doing the observing is conscious as itself, of itself at the same time. And this is what is tricky. Not tricky isn't the word. It's not so easy for consciousness to retain awareness as itself while it observes. And so you could say that, here's a way I would have described it, is that what's called a man number 4 in the fourth way, is working on himself or herself, to use that expression, is observing all the eyes. This is going on. But then what happens sometimes is something begins to see you working on yourself. See, this is a new transition, a new dimension of self-remembering opening up. suddenly you're working on yourself very diligently, very loyally, very consistently, whatever, or very poorly. Doesn't really matter from one point of view. And then you start to realize you can see yourself working on yourself. There's something else going on now. So what I recommend is, as much as possible, when doing all this work on myself, to realize I can also see myself working on myself. I don't know how to say it differently than that. But kind of there's a gear changes then. Something changes, there's a shift. There's a little, now you're not so involved. Isn't that interesting? You can even see, it's a different level of self-remembering when you realize you can see yourself trying to remember yourself. So there's another thing that I think it is practical to recommend to people. When you're trying to remember yourself, try to notice that you can notice that. Sometimes that might be getting too far ahead, though, for someone who's just beginning. Just, self-remembering, we describe it so simply usually. Be aware of yourself right here, right now, in this place. And that never goes away. That foundation remains. It's just that more gets added to it.
Yeah, like self-observation, awareness is observing some aspect of the experience, bringing awareness to some aspect of the experience, the feeling, the thoughts, the attitudes, the pattern. And so we start with that, and that is a very important to maintain. That's the thing. Even if, and self-remembering is being like to have recognized that there is this field of being, but that's more subtle or more advanced. The self-observation is important part of that will start to quiet. If there are a lot of fish and algae all the time, the water is mixed with all of that, so it's too agitated. The process of self-observation and diminishing, tripping out, will gradually decant some of the water, so it becomes more settled. So then we may have, if we are pointed in that direction, to recognize there is the presencing.
Also, I think it can be looked at in terms of identification. It's safe to say, I feel, that we are addicted to identification. We want to be identified. We feel we need to be identified. To sit quietly and do nothing and just look at the world or look at our room. No, we need to engage. There has to be some electricity. And we usually get that in the form of identification. And we think that's vital, that's important, necessary. And it's not. It's contrary, actually, to consciousness turning inward, turning toward its source. It's very different. And so even though, for example, the whole idea of, and I think Ouspensky used this as an example, you feel a negative emotion arise, you're in a situation, you manage not to express that negative emotion, and at the same time you understand why you're choosing not to express it. That's self-remembering. That's being less identified. And you start there. And that's important, and it's rare. Most people aren't doing that. And so this area of negative emotions is very important. And I think you feel yourself identified. Actually, what you usually feel is you feel the result of being identified. And the result is you're hurrying, you're worrying, you're forcing, you're resisting. These are all the results of being identified. And so when we try to back away from all of those things, as I use the analogy, we're coming back, all this water is flowing out of the hose in those forms, in those psychological and physiological forms. Consciousness is trying to make its way back up the hose to the faucet. and start closing that faucet a little bit. And that's where the identification is happening. Consciousness is just going unfiltered, pouring out of itself, you could say, into the four centers, into the body, into the mind, as behavior and as a feeling of I, identification. And so we're trying to back up, come back to the faucet in these different areas is not so easy. And as you say, there's all this agitation. Even if you turn off the flow, the agitation that was there doesn't disappear right away. There's residue. And it can take sometimes a long time for the waters to calm and the effect of identification to wear off. And that's different than being in a position where you're more present and you see the temptation to become identified start and you don't go with it. You don't open the faucet. Then that's a more control of energy. But once it's open, all that agitation is happening. You can't necessarily stop it right away. And that may mean years. It's been like that for years and years. It's not so easy to find the way to the tap, to the faucet in oneself. And kind of establish residence there, establish a sense of being there. Rather than always experiencing oneself as the behavior and as the eyes and as the reactions.
You know,
it's so beautiful, isn't it? This internal world, this internal work. And there's no map. There are very few maps. Which is why I, of course, appreciate the fourth way so much. It's such a exacting map. Sorry, you were about to say something, Mihai.
Well, I was saying that we are again talking at some pretty high level. And I'm meeting with people that seem really genuine and interested in the work and showing up. And somehow grokking these deeply esoteric ideas. And these people that are coming to this group are already, I feel, way more advanced or deep than my regular clients. Yeah? Okay, so now these people that are more advanced and deep and committed to this work, studying fourth way and applying it, I can see that it is natural for them to forget completely about the work for hours and maybe days at a time. And then, so our discussion means nothing because basically the level is like, I guess it's not yet a man number four. Man number four is not just someone who is interested in doing the work. I think it's someone that is the most important thing and is doing the work and is thinking about it, feeling about it from the morning till evening. So I feel that there's a lot of baking needs to happen to get to that point when I think about the work. You know what I'm talking about?
Sure. And it makes me realize too, we forget there are so many different degrees of what is called a man number four. Just as there are degrees of men number 1, 2, and 3. Some people are so ensconced in their life, money, reputation, family, health, even the least little inkling of something, let's call it spiritual, doesn't even occur to them. Even if they go to church and pray and ask to be forgiven, it's just a ceremony. It's just a social habit or imitation. No, and then there are people who do have a stronger spiritual inclination. Life isn't quite what it could be or should be. Something's missing or that kind of thing, right? Fourth way calls it a magnetic center. So there are degrees, and the same with the men number 4. There are many degrees. And so to forget about the work, for hours or days or weeks, it's just depends on the level. And also, it can be such a powerful shock to go for a week or 10 days and realize you forgot completely even about self-remembering. You made an aim, you set a small aim for yourself of some kind, let's say to feel the water each time you washed your hands, to really feel the water in your hands. You set that as an aim for yourself to bring you into the present and to make you more, to provide a means for you to be more consciously aware in that moment. Not for the hands to feel the water, but for you to be conscious of the hands feeling the water. Yes, but then you forgot about it for 3 weeks. Completely gone. Why? Because it was just an I. And that I has been compartmentalized, had no associations that evoked it again or whatever. But then you step into the bathroom 3 weeks later, you are washing your hands, and consciousness realizes itself for a few seconds, watching the hands wash themselves, and then kaboom. Oh my. Now there's a whole nother group of eyes that start. Oh my gosh, I forgot I had this aim. I forgot completely. Those are the eyes talking about it again. But consciousness had not realized itself as the observer for 3 weeks. But that can be so powerful. That can like be a punch in the face that can have a long lasting effect, can be beautiful and take you to the next degree of what is called a man number 4, where now you understand, wait a minute. In fact, this self-remembering is not just about memory. It's not memory. It's called remembering for a different reason. It's not called, I must keep it in my mind. So, yes, you come to a deeper understanding.
I think it's conversion. I think for man number 4, or mature man number 4, or serious man number 4, women, it's all the same. Yeah, we are using
Mhm.
women number 4. It doesn't matter. Yeah, we are.
Yes.
Um, but like once energies need to convert towards, so my heart, my emotional function has to be longing for the teaching, for presence, for doing the work, even if it's uncomfortable, to be longing for that more than longing for a bunch of other stuff. My intellect, so to have the intellect, the emotional, the instinctive moving, there's a ever growing, it becomes a priority. Then, we have to get there first, that the work becomes a priority from day to day. And that takes time and interest, takes time
Mhm.
and interest and disillusionment, be beaten up by life, beaten up, our recipes for happiness to be beaten up.
And it's also what we used to call payment. All this has to be paid for,
Yeah.
this being, and we pay for it through such experiences, seeing we were asleep, seeing that consciousness had not been there consciously. Consciousness is always there. It's always here. It's simply not recognizing itself. And then also the degree to which it is conscious of things varies. And so that's always there, but it's not consciously being there. That's what this work is really about.
Mhm.
It learning that, developing that, you could say. And so we pay by making these, what the fourth way calls efforts to be present, to not identify, to not express negative emotions, not be in imagination. All of these efforts are a form of what is called payment. And it's a form of, you could call it a form of exchange. We have to exchange this energy called effort and in such a way that it will yield more consciousness more often. My teacher used to say that before he encountered the idea of self-remembering as a young man, that he was a vegetable. He used that term. He said, I was a vegetable. And I can say that about myself. There were these flashes of presence during my life. I didn't know what they were. And I was on autopilot my entire life. And it's true for most people until there are rare exceptions, Ramana Maharshi at 16, Mayor Baba at around the same age, something happened. There are other examples in history, these figures, But for most people, it's no. And then even when you do learn about this and you realize you've been driving on the highway for an hour, 70 miles an hour, and you hadn't been there. You were not conscious. Your moving center and your instinctive centers were driving, fortunately, doing their right work.
Mhm.
And you had been in imagination the whole time. Your mind was just turning and consciousness was completely immersed in that, unaware of seeing it and unaware of recognizing itself as the seeing. And this is shocking. This is unnerving. And it's payment. It's a form of payment.
Yeah, but even to get to this level of making payment, conscious effort through self-observation, self-remembering, diminishing imagination, watching, disallowing judgment on expression. In order to even play in that field, because that's what the person said to me, I forgot for 10 days or for a whole day. So in order to play in that field, there's some even more prior thing, like one needs to study. One needs to study the ideas. One needs to listen to some videos relevant to this and to study and to contemplate on it and to put some time aside, But it's interesting, we can't force that. Because when I was a young and I encountered this, I encountered the teachings and I recognized this is gold. And I was on fire. And I wanted me as a seeker, wanted to, and to do it and to asking questions and going and making effort, paying money, traveling. So I guess there's some element of grace or element of maturity.
Yes, because nowadays, all of these ideas, they are so much in the air and so available. I was at a bookstore yesterday and the whole wall was title after title about consciousness, awareness, manifesting, angels, on and on and on. And it's people kind of just, look, yeah, of course, there's that. And people use all sorts of language now, and it's almost taken for granted. And one of the results of that is the description you just gave of yourself, Mihai, to me is an example of essence encountering these kinds of ideas for the first time. And it's something deep in essence resonates. And as you said, this is gold. This is what I've been looking for. This now I realize has more significance than anything else. That's when it's deep. It hits a deep chord in essence. But what happens with some people, not all, but many, is the reaction happens in their personality. I think, oh, that's cool. Oh, yeah, I like that idea. Oh, good, I can make my life better. Or, oh, boy, I can manifest things, whatever it is. And it's more of a personality phenomenon. And then what happens with those kind of people, if they get involved more seriously in something like the work we're discussing, if it has only been in their personality, when they go a little deeper, it becomes a serious threat. And they either stop, they quit, they refuse, they disagree, they refute, whatever they do. Whereas if it's in essence, they become more humbled. When they see themselves and they encounter these difficulties, they become more quiet, more humble, and in a way more quietly determined to continue. They're humbled, they're not hurt. They're not. But everybody's personality is humiliated.
Yeah.
We get humiliated when we do this work and we see the truth about ourselves as a person, because we've imagined ourselves a certain way, and when we start to see how we really are, it's very humbling, humiliating. But that humiliation can carry different flavors. And one is a flavor of integrity and truth. And it's like a bittersweet truth. And it, on the other hand, and it can carry just a flavor of bitterness, anger, resentment, and that kind of thing. It just depends on the person.
Yeah, when you said that, I mean, I told my story as a young man, and it was a story. But then when you reflected back, it touched me. Basically, I had tears of, yeah. So I realized that it reflected back to me that there was actually deep love. There's, that all the effort that as a young man, that also I was really immature in many ways and really full of shit, really, and really a lot of issues at the level of the person or whatever but still there was this love of the recognition of a higher knowledge and the possibility of evolution and the love of that. That's the engine. And whatever we need to do for that to grow, because that's the engine. Otherwise it's kind of weak, and it takes time to grow. And all right, I'll switch gears, Peter. In the non-duality, or even you said, hey, consciousness is already here. Yeah, it's already here. It's already what we are. Okay, they say that. But now I really appreciate, as Gurdjieff, when he was talking to people that were not at the very high level in 1898 or 1900, he won't talk to them like that. He will say, hey, the real I, the I, you don't have an I, you don't have a real I. It's now weak, it's dormant. All the me is sucking all the energy out of the I. So the I is weak, and all of its stuff are siphoned by the me. So you have no I. To have an I, like a real I, yeah, you need to pay, you need to make a lot of effort, you need to do this or that. Don't worry about that, just do your exercises. I'm reading now a lot of this, not Uspensky, but like records from meetings with Gurdjieff. He would just give people exercises, and they would say, hey, how did it go? Told you this last time, tell me how did it go. And okay, I'll give you this exercise. Oh no, you didn't do it, don't come to me, do the exercise. So he keeps talking about, I guess, these exercises. There were some general, but many of them customized for them. There were some way for them to bring more awareness and struggle with some aspect of sleep, and then accumulate some more currency somehow, and reverse the siphoning somehow. And only later, I remember Gurdjieff was talking to Uspensky, asking him after a few years, hey, have you noticed there's a new feeling of I? And Uspensky said, no. And then Uspensky later said, after 2 or 3 years, I felt now there was a whole other feeling of I that wasn't there before. So my question, my understanding is that although the presence is what we are, is always there, it's us being asleep, it's as if it doesn't exist. So there's just this production of a small me with the many 10,000 eyes. And it takes some type of conscious effort, conscious struggle, quite some time, earnestness, and then that may lead to at some point the recognition of presence, which will be like, oh, now there is an I. That's so-called, they call it non-duality, recognition of what I am. I think came as a result of some jump starting of awareness and of cleaning up some of the static. And then now self-remembering becomes something else, because we have a taste of that, so it's coming back to that coming back to itself, like being this presence knowingly. That will be the self-remembering.
I think I would just add to that this new feeling of I, to put it like that, the way Ouspensky wrote about it, that what can be misunderstood or mistaken is that it's somehow a continuation of the feeling of the old I, but now cleansed or improved or something like that. When in fact, that's not the case. It's another dimension. If you want to call it a feeling of I in another dimension, to me, that would be a little more accurate. But it's not the old feeling, the old familiar feeling of me and I. Even I am genuinely devoted to this work, or I am working hard. I've made so much payment. I want to be more awake. All this, no, it's a very different, and it's because it's a different dimension. As the fourth way says, it's a different world in us. We've been so accustomed to what's called world 96 and even world 48, just pure thought. But to then go to essence, world 24, it's not as familiar to us as we would like to believe. And this is where it begins, this deeper feeling of being. And you could call it, it's still the feeling of I. And to me, this is why essence, it's still experienced, it is still experienced as a feeling of I. Even when it's very pure now and much more conscious. It has yielded much more consciousness. But then beyond that, and the higher we go, the less it is a feeling of I. It is a recognition as being. It's different. It's not I. And I is seen in the distance as this feeling of being the person, both physically and psychologically, both the physical life as this person and the inner world of the psychological inner world that we have occupied. That is our realm, our sight. Each of us is in a sort of our own particular psychological arena. It's where we've been dwelling with and calling that I. And now this other realization comes, it's this other dimension, and it's not. And as I say, at a certain point, it is outside, because it's in the sense that it's in another dimension. We don't talk like this often, and people don't think about this. What? You mean I can exist in different dimensions of my being? There are different dimensions? Really? Yes. Yes, and there are many. And this is part of the trouble too, is we move up and down in the lake a lot. We go from the surface to a few feet below to way down near the bottom. And it's different, as you said, when the whole lake, all the water in the lake now starts to realize itself. It's the water. It occupies all of that realm. And it's not just about the individual fish and where they are. And now, no matter where there is a feeling of identification, to use your analogy, now when there's a feeling of identification associated with a certain I, it doesn't matter where that I is. It could be a very noble I, could be a very deep, dark, terrible memory I down near the bottom in the mud. Doesn't matter, because the water, all the water in this lake is now conscious as itself, and it can see any of these eyes and know instantly it is the water, that is the fish. And this is a big difference, obviously, just using that analogy. Just that analogy is very vivid in this sense. But then I'm proposing too, it's possible for the sky to realize itself looking even at the water and looking at and so now there are more dimensions kind of ahead or above. And that's another thing about this work. This doesn't stop. This awakening, this evolution, this enlightenment business, it doesn't stop. It's not that simple. I don't see it as that simple like that. Now it's, you've arrived and you're there and it stops. No, it continues, and there continues to be new things to observe. There continues, let's say, there continues to be self-observation, and there continues to be self-remembering, and both of them expand into other dimensions. And I don't know. It's so important for us not to take it personally, especially when we're in the lake. That has to be partly intuition, I think. We have to see we're taking ourselves too seriously. We're taking ourselves too personally. Our problems, our cross, our worries, our fears, our memories. We have to pull anchor at some point. And then it's very liberating. If you've ever been sailing, you pull anchor and now you're sailing free. It's a wonderful feeling.
Well,
this is quite a discussion for the new year, Mihai.
Yeah, it's a strong do.
Yes, it is. It is. And you and I were starting this our talks a little over a year ago, and then we got more serious with our 9-week or 3-month those sessions we did. And now it's been a year really since we started that. So this is a nice new dough in a new year.
I mean, we know that, but hanging out with people that are interested in the work and people that are more advanced than us in the work, that's a essential element. Reading this on your own, watching videos, I think that's okay, that's good, but ultimately finding a group that is right for you. And I can see in the group I'm doing, the first few months, is all this like, yeah, we are this together and it's wonderful. And then after another few more months, now people are triggered and they have judgments and comparing. And so this is actually a good sign, basically.
Yes.
Because that was playing out there. All of this false personality dance is playing out all my life. And now we are in this bubble. There's a lot of light in it. And if we remember the principle of the work, because I have it on my wall, I used to have it higher. But then as I noticed this rumbling in the group, I put it eyesight
At eye level, yes.
That Gurdjieff says, remember, you came here having already understood the necessity of struggling with yourself and only with yourself. Therefore, thank everyone who gives you this opportunity. So all of this are met non-judgmentally with awareness, and this opportunity for that they burn away. And yeah.
This is, to me, this idea we've talked about before too. It's the cocoon.
Yeah.
A group is a cocoon, and there's meant to be this breakdown, this metamorphosis of the old before it can reassemble itself in new form at a higher dimension. And part of that is exactly what you're describing, that you feel more, there's more contention, more as you said, triggering and judgment, and it's because there's more pressure, and we react from our old tendencies when there's more pressure. And this is what, to go back to where we started talking a little bit, this idea, how do you use pressure, and how do you learn to not be used by pressure? Because pressure will act on us and we react and we don't respond consciously. And learning to make that turnaround, to respond consciously, like when we get triggered, for example, this requires self-remembering, self-observation, understanding a degree of conscious will. It's no small thing. And so to see that you can't do that is a good thing. As you say, it's a good sign. As long as it's being done in earnest, and I know it is. I know some of the people in your group, and so, but yes, that's what happens.
All right, Peter, let's stop here for now. And if also, I know there are some people out there I don't even know. They are kind of watching this and trying to apply this. So feel free to, if you have any questions or topics of interest, shoot them out to us. All right. And I would like to end with this. Somebody gave me this as a Christmas gift. You can't see it, huh?
The trouble is, you think you have time.
Yeah, I'm not sure who said it, but that's the thing. The trouble is you think you have time to push this for later, to keep being distracted, to yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Mihai.